Welcome to the David Conklin Farmhouse and Museum, owned and operated by the Huntington Historical Society. And what we would like to try to do today is to take you through the current exhibit, which is called From House Calls to Hospitals, and it features Dr. Samuel Teich's 1940 office. The museum is open on the afternoons of Friday and Sunday from 1 to 4, and of course the House Museum would be open then as well. Welcome to the David Conklin House Gallery, which is where the present exhibit is installed. The story will feature, of course, Dr. Samuel Teich's office that we'll see later on in it, but there are really four aspects to the exhibit. And one of the aspects is the history of the village of Huntington Station. Huntington Station didn't exist until the railroad extended the line from Syosset to Northport in 1868. There was some controversy about price of land. The village wanted the station a little bit closer to it, but the railroad decided to put it 2 miles south of the village, and as a result, another village grew up, and in 1868, the village of Huntington Station began to develop. The village, of course, started out as a service serving the railroad station, but over the 100-year period between 1868 and 1968, it developed into a flourishing villages with businesses, banks, as you see here in the 1930 photograph of the New York Avenue looking north from essentially the trestle today. What we've done on this wall is to map out New York Avenue as it heads north to Huntington Village and show the development of that village through pictures of the village that grew up in that 100-year period. You'll see stores on both sides of the street. In fact, you'll come down to an early house that Dr. Teich bought in 1940. He moved it to face south, perpendicular to New York Avenue really, and rebuilt it to set up his home office in it. But a lot of these stores, most of these stores were all torn down in 1968 with urban renewal. This building here on the right is one of the few buildings that remain just north of where Dr. Teich's house, which also exists today, and is now an antique center. And across the street from that, which is now essentially a parking lot, was the firehouse that you can see here. It was quite a handsome building. There were a number of big, substantial buildings in the village that no longer exist today, but hopefully the village will return with a commercial aspect to it. The Teich family came to Huntington Station right around the turn of the 20th century. Three brothers essentially settled here. They brought their elderly parents, who you can see pictured up there, and the three brothers developed businesses. They raised cattle on Park Avenue. They ran a dairy in Huntington Station. They had food markets at different places, including Main Street and Huntington Village. Dr. Teich was born in 1907, and he was the son of Max Teich, and he married Beatrice in 1935, and they had three boys that you can see pictured here on this little family tree. A second aspect of the exhibit is the history of healthcare in Huntington throughout the ages. And we start back as early as 1750 when we have doctors, Dr. Potter, Dr. Zophyr Platt, Dr. Daniel Wiggins, Dr. Benjamin Young Prime, were all doctors that served the country. And then, of course, we come over here and look at a house that is also owned by the Huntington Historical Society, was also a doctor's house office complex. It was the house of Dr. Daniel Whitehead Kassam, who moved in 1796 into a brand new house and raised a family of 17 children. And of course, that's our house on Park Avenue, which is also open to the public. Dr. Kassam died in 1839, and his practice was taken over by his son-in-law, Dr. Charles B. Sturgis. He maintained a practice there till about 1857, when the house left the family. The society bought the house in 1968. Other doctors in the exhibit are Dr. Joseph Ray, and then we get into the doctors during the Civil War period. We have Dr. William D. Wooden, Walter Lindsay, Dr. Gibson, and Dr. George W. Sword. Our timeline continues into the early 20th centuries, where we have a Dr. Carter, a Dr. McLean, Dr. Pataky, Dr. Falkenberg here, and then we end our kind of timeline with Dr. Teich. Now, Dr. Teich was a general practitioner when he started. He ended up being mostly a baby doctor, and his obituary makes the claim that he delivered 10,000 babies in the town of Huntington. We also try to picture some of the houses the different doctors lived in. This is that house shortly after it was moved and rebuilt of Dr. Teich. It's on the east side of New York Avenue in Huntington Station, and of course it still stands today. In this case, we have some early medical instruments that are in the collection of the Huntington Historical Society. The one here on the left is a tool extractor from the Civil War era. It's quite unique because it has different size hooks for different size teeth. And as we scan over to a little bit to the right, we have some early medical instruments from Dr. Benjamin Prime of Huntington. He dates back to the Revolutionary War, and there's a small little knife that is defined as a scalpel, and it was donated by Miss Sarah Prime. We were also fortunate to have two medical books that were donated to us from the collection of Dr. Daniel Whitehead Kassam when he was practicing in his home office on Park Avenue. They date back to the period of time when he was practicing in the early 19th century. And finally, over here on the right, we have a journal that is on loan from the Green Lawn Center Board Historical Association, and it is from the Smith family who lived up on the Park Avenue farm that is now operated by the Green Lawn Center Board Historical Association and called the John Gardner Farm. The Smiths married into the Gardner family. But it shows a journal entry of Dr. Daniel Whitehead Kassam bartering his medical services in about 1810. One of the items in the Huntington Historical Society's collection is a painting by a local artist, James Long Scudder, in the 19th century. This one's dated 1877, and he did this portrait of his good friend, Dr. William D. Wooden. We're quite proud. It's a fairly large painting, and we were quite proud to have it out on display during this exhibit. But the third component of the exhibit, and really the inspiration of the exhibit, is this office. When the Teich brothers decided they had to sell their parents' home, Dr. Teich retired in 1985. He lived till 1995, and Beatrice lived until 2008. They had to sell the house, and this office complex still remained in the house. The door was closed on it in 1985 and essentially hadn't changed. But it was set up in 1940, just before Dr. Teich went off to war and served in World War II. So what we did was extract the office as it existed and rebuilt it right here. And we included even a built-in cabinet which retains the original green paint, and we tried to match that to a certain degree in the rest of the office. Even to the extent, of course, of painting the window at the far end of the office, which was done by our volunteer, Robin Horn. This is as close as we could to represent what we actually found when we walked into the office. The medical tools were still laying out, the medicine was here, the gauze wraps, the blood pressure machine, the class picture from the Long Island Medical College was here. Dr. Teich went to the Huntington schools, and he grew up in Huntington Station, of course. He went to the Huntington schools, graduated from Huntington High School, went to Cornell University, and then went to the Long Island Medical College, before he came back in the early 1930s to practice in Huntington Station. Of course, everything came out of the office, the examining table, the sink complex, as I said, the tools and the medicines were sitting out, and then even this great 1940s doctor's scale and height measure was sitting right as you see it today in his original office. And in an outer office, there was this desk where patients had given Dr. Teich cartoons about doctors, and this bookcase where he had his medical books, and on top he would collect all sorts of doctor figurines and so forth. And there were a lot of pictures of babies that were that he had delivered and they had been sent to him. And over on that far wall we have some testimonials of mothers who remember delivering their now adult children and parents themselves back over the years that Dr. Teich was delivering babies. And of course these are two instruments now that stood in the office. I'm not so sure I'm an expert enough to know what they are. They do have graphics on them though, if you want to come and visit the exhibit, and you can read our research on them. And over here we have the story of Dr. Teich and his involvement in World War II. He was awarded a number of medals, including the Bronze Star Medal Citation. He was part of the 19th Corps, I think, 62nd Medical Battalion. Went into Europe in the late or in the mid-40s, toward the end of the war. Well, actually, he landed in 44 in June 10th. It was the second landing, and he followed that first push into Germany. And we have his uniform here. He was part of the Tomahawk battalion, whose symbol anyway was the Tomahawk patch here that we have. And it was aimed at splitting he was part of that surge that split the Nazi First and Third Army in half. And the fourth and final component of the exhibit was really the history of Huntington Hospital. Huntington Hospital was first conceived in 1911 and by a committee of town folks who had gathered together and felt that the town of the significance of Huntington needed a hospital. They actually didn't open the doors of the hospital until 1916, but they began building it in 1915. And the very first hospital building that they built still stands today. It was attached to an existing house on the property that they bought. But today, of course, it is the older building that's in front of the present complex. These are some photographs of a couple of the early operating rooms and offices in that original hospital building. And of course, when Dr. Teich came back to Huntington in 1933, the hospital had just built a new modern facility, and you see that pictured up there. And it is today serving as part of the huge hospital complex that it has become. Dr. Teich joined the hospital staff in 1933 and was a member of the staff for over 50 years. We also tell the story of the two people that are credited with forming that early hospital, and one is Cornelia Prime. She was a daughter of Rufus Prime, who lived here in Huntington, and whose family goes way back to the origins of Huntington. But she was a tremendous philanthropist, and she is the one that provided the initial funding of the hospital. And she had a close friend who was a retired doctor from New York City, Edward Marsh, and where he was considered the father of Huntington Hospital. He also had a passion for baseball, and he supported and coached the Huntington Baseball Club in the early 20th century. What we have here, and luckily Huntington Hospital had these in their archives, are a number of staff pictures of the medical staff and the nursing staff from Huntington Hospital, and they start as early as the 1930s, and we can find Dr. Teich and that staff, the 1940s, and he's there as well as in the 1950s hospital staff. It also shows the great development of the Huntington Hospital into the modern hospital that it is today. Also in the hospital archives is this 1915 architectural rendering of the west elevation of what became that hospital building, as well as some of the early hospital association reports and brochures, fundraising brochures that they used over the years of its expansion. This is another early instrument that we found in Dr. Teich's office. It's an early sun lamp, and as we swing over into the cabinet, we can see the goggles that would have protected the eyes, the different size goggles that protected the eyes under that sun lamp, as well as a number of other early medical tools that were in Dr. Teich's office. And finally, in this case, what we have here is the 1924 graduation announcement, commencement announcement from Huntington High School, announcing the graduation of Samuel Teich. We have an early medical photo of him when he would have been in medical school, or maybe Cornell, and then his wedding pictures in the background there. And then finally, a picture of Dr. Teich and Beatrice later on in life. It has been a great pleasure for the Huntington Historical Society to put this exhibit together. We've learned a lot about the medical profession, particularly about the Teich family and its history, or part of history, in the town of Huntington. I hope you've enjoyed this video of our exhibit here at Huntington Historical Society on house calls to hospitals. The transition from house calls into hospitals is one that every community has gone through, but it was nice to have on exhibit the history of the Huntington medical profession.